ankles and feet, partially feet of Mr. Ellis. His case number 20-0519 is the unique case number given to this case. Just to recall, there's focal areas of abrasions or scrapes to the shin, and then there are these contusions or patterns in the upper ankle, and you can see them here, and you can see how in this picture it is part of the medial surface of the leg, and for the purposes of the record, I'm pointing to the lower inside of the leg, and then it extends across the front of the upper ankle, lower leg, and then extends. You can see that it's still present laterally or on the outside of the leg. So from this picture, it looks like it goes all the way around the lower ankle, the upper ankle.
And is that kind of circumferential nature of it, meaning all the way around the ankle, was that also visible in photographs that were taken at the scene of Mr. Ellis's lower legs?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury what is going to cause a mark like this?
Well, it would be a strap or some type of thick fabric around the ankle. It's a pattern abrasion, so there's pretty well demarcation or margins of the injury. So some type of strap that can happen, that can cause that.
Okay. And on Thursday, we talked about the hobble restraint. And I believe you gave us your opinion, but what's your opinion as to whether or not this injury, this circumferential injury to Mr. Ellis's right leg, is consistent with that hobble strap that was recovered in this case?
This injury would be consistent with the hobble strap used in the restraint of Mr. Ellis.
And so you said it's caused by a strap. Is it simply caused by the strap being on the ankle, or does it take more than that to create this kind of injury?
Well, like we described last week, anytime you see a bruise, that's considered blunt force trauma. So this would be the squeezing, or really the squeezing of a strap against the skin and underlying soft tissue to cause this bruise. So it would require force in order to cause this bruise.
And do you have an opinion as to whether or not that bruise on Mr. Ellis's right ankle could have been caused in part by the tethering of his handcuffs to the hobble device behind his back?
Yes.
And what's your opinion about that?
Well, there's going to be a pulling of the strap against the skin surface to cause it. It being connected to handcuffs behind his back, pulled by law enforcement or whoever is applying the strap to the ankle. It can occur in any of those scenarios.
All right, I want to move on and talk about a couple of other photos. I'm going to have you shown 271J, which I believe has also been admitted, Your Honor, if we may publish.
Proceed.
All right, can you just explain to the jury what we can see in this photograph and why it was significant to you?
So again, this is a picture of Mr. Ellis on the bottom of his face and chin, for the record, neck, chest with both of his nipples showing, as well as his upper abdomen. In this picture is showing 3 pinpoint areas of injury to his chest. One in the midline or the center in the upper belly, one just left of the upper belly, and then one in the left upper belly. You can see here.
Okay. And what would you, and based on your experience, what are those marks consistent with, or do you have an opinion as to what they might be consistent with?
I mean, both the report, they're really non-specific findings. but both the report and what I know about the case, these are consistent with taser marks.
And based on your review of the video, all the other evidence in the case, are you aware of whether or not Mr. Ellis was tased?
Yes.
And tell us, how does a taser make those kinds of marks?
There are particular sharp barbs, needles, if you will, at the end of the taser wires. Those enter into the skin surface and would cause these types of injuries.
If we could have you take a look at State's Exhibit 259, which was also admitted. If we may publish, Your Honor.
Proceed.
And what does this photograph show?
This is a close-up of the two marks that were shown in the kind of upper area of the belly, right where the chest hits the belly, that I described just a moment ago. So these are the two close-up photographs of those.
Okay. And if we could take a look at 271K. And same question with respect to this photograph. What does it show?
There's the unique case identifier with the scale and ruler that's underneath the third area of injury that is consistent with the taser mark.
Thank you. All right, you can take your seat again if you want. Now, Dr. Mitchell, you said that you reviewed all of the evidence that was also collected with Mr. Ellis's body. Is that right?
Pictures of him.
Pictures of them?
Yes.
And did you have an opportunity to look at a spit hood that was collected with Mr. Ellis's body?
Yes.
If you could take a look, and if we could publish, Your Honor, 271M and then N.
Proceed.
All right, can you just tell the jury what M is, what you recognize it to be?
I recognize it to be the spit hood.
And if we could look at N real quick. All right, and is that also another photograph that you looked at of the spit hood?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury, Dr. Mitchell, what if anything was significant to you about this spit hood?
Well, the spit hood is stained with blood, and I think that's probably the most significant.
And why is that significant?
Well, he's, as we described and looked at the images of him before, he has significant injury of the face. He has some injuries of his lips, which would all produce blood within that spit hood. And so anytime that I would see a spit hood with blood, then I would worry that he would be at risk of aspirating blood or breathing in fluid and blood that is being gathered in this spit hood.
Well, did Dr. Clark describe anything about the spit hood that you were not able to observe yourself?
Yeah, he described that there was mucus on the spit hood, and that the spit hood had fluid on the spit hood. I would not necessarily be able to see that here. I could make that connection because it's stained, but he actually saw the fluid and the mucus on the spit hood.
And do you recall approximately how long after Mr. Ellis had died that that Dr. Clark would have seen the spit hood to make those observations?
I believe it was within hours. I believe he was at the medical examiner's office within hours of his death.
Thank you. All right, I want to, now that we've kind of talked about the injuries and some of your process, last week you talked about cause of death and you talked about the mechanisms of death. Can you just explain to the jury what the difference is between those two things?
Yes. So when we talk about cause of death, we are talking about the proximate cause of death, without which the death would not have occurred. So that's the cause of death. It is it needs to be specific, even if it's complex. Mechanism of death is how that cause affected the body. It's the how. So in this particular case, I have the cause of death as mechanical asphyxia during violent subdual and restraint. Part of that mechanism of death would be hypoxia, right? A lack of oxygen because of that. We talk about in my report acidosis. We talk about in my report cardiac output. All of those things would be mechanisms of how that violent subdual restraint and mechanical asphyxia would be causing the death. So mechanism is part of the cause of death, but it is the how, if that makes sense.
And you mentioned acidosis. What is acidosis?
It's the building of acid in the body. How the body processes sugar. The body needs sugar to live, right? Some of you may be scientists, so glucose is the fancy term. And when glucose is processed, or sugar is processed, it's processed either with or without oxygen. If it's processed with oxygen, then it creates a chemical compound that goes into that Krebs cycle and creates energy. When it's without oxygen, it goes into a process that creates acid. And that acid can also be used to create energy, but it is an acid. Our body likes a particular balance. When the body gets too acidic or too much acid in it, then it wants to change that environment. The body, how it does that is it breathes faster. That's how your body gets rid of acid. That's the biggest mechanism, and urination. But the body breathes it off in the form of carbon dioxide. So that's why we're getting, increase in breath to breathe off acid. So acid is functionally a byproduct of sugar when oxygen is not present. And you can see acid build up, particularly in individuals that are hypoxic or low oxygen.
Now, you talked a little bit last week about hypoxia and your opinion that Mr. Ellis's death was caused by the altercation with law enforcement. Is that right?
Yes.
Overruled, it's foundational, go ahead.
What aspects of the altercation with law enforcement, with the defendants, were important to you in terms of determining what the cause of his death was?
So the violent subdual and restraint, so that altercation, for lack of better terms, that fight, that altercation, is going to play a part. And then the restraint when the lateral neck hold is being put in place, as well as when he's being placed on his stomach and forced into a position where his arms are behind his back and his legs are behind him in a hobbled restraint. That also leads to an inability of his chest to be able to expand, to breathe off that acid that I just spoke about. It decreases that ability for him to do that. So all of the above are contributing, are causing his death.
So we talked a minute ago about mechanism versus cause of death. Can you just walk us through what was the mechanism of Mr. Ellis's death?
The mechanism would be the hypoxia and the acidosis would be the mechanism. The cause is the altercation and the position he was in, the mechanical asphyxia. Another component of how he would become a hypoxic is the presence of individuals on his back, in addition to the position, would also play a part into his hypoxia or decrease of oxygen.
And so we talked a little bit about hypoxia before, but in terms of hypoxia, what does that then lead to in terms of what Mr. Ellis's body is going to do in terms of how it ultimately causes his death?
Well, the hypoxia is going to lead to acidosis. And the hypoxia also, the heart is very sensitive to oxygen. It's not as sensitive to as the brain is to oxygen, but it is a close second. And anytime there is a decrease of oxygen into the heart will slow itself down, and it will begin to start trying to maintain a low oxygen consumption. Now that the body realizes it doesn't have enough oxygen, it wants to slow its metabolism down so it doesn't use a whole bunch of oxygen. And that can lead to death. So any decrease in oxygen to the heart can lead to death. On top of that, the acid production, because there's not a lot of oxygen, can lead to death. In the case of Manuel Ellis, it is the combination. We're talking about mechanism. It's the combination of those things that's leading to his death.
And is hypoxia always fatal?
If not treated, yes.
Okay, so if it's treated early enough, is it not fatal?
Yes.
Someone can recover from it? Can you explain that to us?
Well, we have a built-in recovery mechanism from hypoxia, and that's breathing hard. When we become hypoxic or acidotic, increased acid, not enough oxygen in our body, we breathe heavy. That's how we handle it. If we can't breathe heavy, something's stopping us from breathing heavy, then we need supplemental oxygen. We need an oxygen placed on our nose or a mask or whatever it is to give us oxygen. If you don't have those two things in place, the ability to do it yourself or someone to help you do it, then you'll die from hypoxia.
So based on everything you've read and reviewed in this case, the videos, the witness testimony, the autopsy, and the other details that you've seen, can you just explain to the jury what are the details of the altercation that indicate to you that mechanical asphyxiation was the cause of death here?
Well,
It sounds like it.
Let me ask a better question. Are you able, are there aspects of what you observed in terms of the altercation itself that are consistent with your conclusion that Mr. Ellis died from, the cause of his death was the restraint by law enforcement and the mechanical asphyxiation due to the violent subdual restraint?
Go ahead, you may answer if you can, Doctor.
Yes. The answer to that is yes. There is clear evidence that he was placed in a prone position with individuals on his back in a hobbled restraint. That circumstance after which someone has been in a violent altercation is going to impede his ability to then be able to get enough oxygen and to breathe as fully as he's needed in order to sustain his life. So there is clear evidence to support my opinion that mechanical asphyxia during the violent subdual and restraint is his cause of death.
And prone positioning being on the stomach, is that right?
Yes, prone positioning is on the stomach.
And I think you explained why that can create problems in terms of somebody breathing when you testified last Thursday. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And so what is it about, and first of all, is someone just in the prone position on the ground, is that going to always cause somebody's death?
No.
Why not?
Because someone who is in a prone position, meaning laying on their stomach, if they have trouble breathing in that position, then they can get out of that position. They can roll to their side, they can get up, they don't have to stay in that position if they're uncomfortable or can't breathe or can't catch their breath in that position. They can stop being in that position. So
the human won't stay in a position that is going to kill them. They're going to move out of that position. So by itself, it can give the symptoms or begin giving the symptoms of decreased oxygen and discomfort, but that person is going to roll out of that position and not stay in it.
Now, you said a moment ago that Mr. Ellis was put in the prone position after he'd been in a violent altercation. What, if any, impact, in your opinion, can you just explain to us why the violent altercation might have affected Mr. Ellis's ability to breathe when he was in a prone position?
So that violent altercation, that exchange is going to increase his heart rate, it's going to increase his need for oxygen, it's going to increase everything that he needs to sustain his life. His metabolism is going to go up, everything's going to go up. And now, when that altercation is fully restrained, for lack of better terms, he's not able to exchange the necessary oxygen and carbon dioxide. He's not able to move his chest the way someone that is not restrained or not in this position would be able to. And that's why I believe that the mechanical asphyxia is the ultimate cause of death. Because when after that violent subdual, and he's allowed to catch his breath, he's allowed to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide, then he may not have died.
Can you give us an analogy or an example of how that might affect somebody's breathing in terms of an altercation or exercising prior to being put in a prone restraint?
I mean, I guess an example is, you know, if you were not trained to run a mile, right? You haven't run a mile since you were a teenager, and you decide, oh, I'm gonna run a mile today, and you go off sprinting on your mile, and then right after that mile, you're placed on your stomach, and your arms are behind your back and your legs are behind your back. You're trying to breathe after you've exerted yourself and wasn't prepared to exert yourself. That is going to be a very dangerous position to be in.
I think a moment ago you mentioned cardiac output. How does prone positioning impact cardiac output?
Well, prone positioning is going to influence cardiac output because your heart it pumps, and it pumps within a chest that has a particular diameter and a particular how we're set up in our rib cage. If that rib cage is compressed, and that's what happens in the prone position even without weight on your back. And if you have a large belly, then that belly can be pushed up into the chest underneath your diaphragm as well. And your diaphragm can't move down like it should when you're breathing. Your heart also doesn't have as much room to pump. And so when you're in a prone position, then you have a decreased cardiac output, particularly if you have someone, you know, or something on your back. So cardiac output is the amount of blood that is pumped out of your heart to get to the organs.
And based on your review of the materials and your opinion in this matter, did Mr. Ellis have something on his back?
Yes.
What did he have?
He had individuals on his back.
Officers?
Yes.
Now, I want to ask you about some other things that occurred with Mr. Ellis. You're aware that he was tased multiple times, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you have an opinion as to how that might, whether or not that tasing had any impact on the mechanism or the cause of Mr. Ellis's death?
So I did not include tasing in my cause and manner of death, largely because in my experience, when I have included tasing is when there was more than more than 3 times of a taser being used. Drive stuns have been used, and those cases were clearly in excess use of the taser device. I did not see that in this case. The literature talks about when there's excess use of taser device, also metabolic acidosis, but from a different mechanism. The breakdown of skeletal muscle is what they believe, is what the literature suggests, is how taser can cause death. Other ways in the literature taser has caused death, and taser's the trademark name. It's really an electrical mechanical device. But the way that it has caused death, if someone receives that lack of a better term, that electrical impulse and then falls to the ground and hits their head or something like that, or that's when it's been shown in the literature. So I didn't see any of those particular issues in this case.
And with respect to the lateral vascular neck hold, which sounds like, did you observe that yourself?
I saw a video of it, yes.
And what, if any, impact would that lateral vascular neck restraint have on the mechanism or the cause of Mr. Ellis's death?
Well, that's the beginning of his hypoxia. I mean, the lateral neck hold, its purpose is to create hypoxia, to decrease the amount of blood flow to the brain, so that the brain is the most sensitive to the lack of oxygen, so that someone will black out. And that's the purpose of delivering that neck hold. So it was the beginning of a hypoxic condition within his body.
And we just talked about the spit hood a moment ago. Can you tell the jury what your opinion is as to how or whether the spit hood would have played a role with respect to the mechanism or the cause of Mr. Ellis's death?
Overruled.
I put the spit hood in the contributing cause within my report, largely because it's a marker, and what I believe is subsequent aspiration or breathing in of blood, that is a marker of aspiration. The blood in the spit hood is another reason why he would have been hypoxic and contributory. So that's why it's in my contributory line and not in my cause of death line.
All right. Did you have an opportunity, or did you look at the observations, the information from the fire EMTs when they arrived at the scene of
Yes.
their observations of Mr. Ellis? Were those important to you, or did they play any role in your conclusion that Mr. Ellis died from the restraint of law enforcement?
Yes.
And can you explain how?
So it's, in this case, it's not often that you have video in these types of cases. It's also not often that you have EMS.
It sounds like it's not responsive. The question had to do with what information from the fire or medical response was important to his opinion.
I'll change.
Wasn't that the question?
Yeah, go ahead, Dr.
So also, it's not often that you have EMS that arrives and there is a rhythm that is being recorded at the time in which EMS arrives. And so anytime you have EMS arrive and they actually have an objective measure of heart rate, objective measure of the condition of the body, that's really, really good information. And so when they arrived, he was in bradycardia, which was a slowing of the heart rate, and then he went into pulseless electrical activity as he went into asystole, or the lack of his heart being able to pump. And that becomes important for us to understand, because in respiratory arrest and hypoxia, particularly PEA is seen in those two conditions, as well as you can see the bradycardia is one of the ways, as I described before, how the heart responds to decreased oxygen. So those findings, objective findings by emergency response personnel, also influenced my opinion.
And what is, you said respiratory or respiratory arrest. Can you just explain that to the jury, what that means?
Yeah, it's functionally, did the heart stop first and that's what stopped you from breathing? Or did you have a lack of the ability to breathe and that's what stopped your heart that led to your death? So it's the difference between respiratory arrest and cardiac arrest. They're nuanced, but physiologically they present a bit differently. And PEA is one of the ways someone presents when they're in respiratory arrest.
And so what did Mr. Ellis have? Did he have respiratory or respiratory arrest preceding cardiac arrest or vice versa?
He had respiratory arrest and then cardiac arrest.
And is that respiratory or respiratory arrest consistent with your conclusion that he died from mechanical asphyxiation due to the violent subdual restraint?
Yes.
How so?
Through the mechanism that I just described to the jury, is that when you have the inability to breathe and you have hypoxia, because of that, that is functionally respiratory arrest.
And you talked about a moment ago bradycardia. Is that, and I think you said it was a slowing of the heart rate, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what causes that, bradycardia?
So bradycardia can be caused by several reasons, but germane to what we're talking about here, it would be the decrease of oxygen availability to the heart muscles, and that heart muscle slow down.
All right, I want to get back to your report that you said that you've given us the cause and the mechanism, I guess, of Mr. Ellis's death, as well as the manner of his death. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and the manner of his death you concluded was what?
Homicide.
And what are the other options in terms of manner of death?
Suicide, accident, natural, undetermined.
And I take it you excluded those other potential cause or manners of death?
Yes.
Now, I think you said your report also talked about contributory causes. Is that right?
Yes.
Can you just explain to the jury, what does it mean to be a contributory cause?
The contributory cause is injuries or diseases that were present at the time of death that would have influenced the ultimate cause, but are not the cause itself.
Can you give us an example of that, what you mean?
So if someone is shot and they're bleeding, and they have underlying heart disease, bad coronary artery disease, that blood loss is going to affect that individual a little worse and a little faster than someone else that was shot, and they'll die. So in a case of someone who is shot and the mechanism, I believe, is blood loss, then the heart disease may go in my part 2, may go in my contributing line.
And do you still have your report up there, or?
I do not.
Okay, let me get it for you. Handing you what's been marked as 479. So just kind of want to go through the things that you listed as contributory causes, but not the proximate cause of Mr. Ellis's death. Can you tell the jury, what did you list as contributory causes?
For the record, I'm looking at the report. The contributing cause is evidence of aspiration of blood and oral contents due to spit hood placement, comma, methamphetamine toxicity, comma, dilatation of the heart.
All right, now I want to just kind of go through and talk about all three of those things. So can we start with the contributing cause, number one, the food and blood in the lungs? Can you just explain to the jury what you concluded and what that means?
Yeah. So that anytime you have aspiration, and this is what we've been talking about over the last couple of days, is when you breathe in food contents or blood, that's going to act as a barrier to the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide of the lungs. So it's contributory because I believe that that's going to also impact his ability to respond to the hypoxia.
Because it's material that shouldn't be in his lungs.
That is correct.
Okay, so he can't recover more quickly or recover as easily from his lungs from the hypoxia?
That is correct.
All right, how about, let's talk about contributing cause number two, the methamphetamine toxicity. Can you first just tell us why is that listed as a contributory cause and not the cause of death?
So his methamphetamine toxicity, he had about 2.5 milligrams per liter in his system. According to all sources, that's a relatively high dose of methamphetamine. Methamphetamine is a stimulant and acts on the heart particularly. That methamphetamine, the presence of methamphetamine, and even if there wasn't the 2.5, if there was lower, the mere presence of that methamphetamine and someone who has a heart that's larger than normal, in someone who is prone and in receipt of a violent altercation, that methamphetamine has the potential to contribute to the death because of its effect on the heart. That's why it's in the contributing line, is because it's, for lack of better terms, it's a cardiotoxic drug, so that being there is going to affect him.
How are you able to say that the methamphetamine alone, I believe it was 2.4 milligrams per nanoliter, I don't know if it matters in terms of 2.5 or 2.4, but how can you say that that's not what killed him as opposed to the restraint?
Foundation speculation.
If you have an opinion that's more probable than not, doctor, you can answer.
Yes. You know, he's walking home. He has this level. He has the level of methamphetamine. He has the dilated heart. So he's walking home at that point. And the efficient intervening cause is the violent altercation and subdual. It's him being beat up that's leading to his death. So to me, it's clear.
That opinion that he's being beat up, that is improper opinion, Judge.
Overruled, you may continue.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was finished my statement.
Okay. So, and in terms of, I mean, do you have experience as a medical examiner with people who die from meth overdoses?
Oh yes, I've seen many meth overdoses.
And can you just give the jury an idea, is there a certain level of methamphetamine at which you say, you know, you would die or you had to have died from that?
No, there's no particular level of methamphetamine that is you're going to die from it. There's a range of level for methamphetamine that people have died from methamphetamine, and there's an overlap between the range of individuals that have died from methamphetamine and a range of individuals that have died with and not from methamphetamine. And those ranges overlap. Individuals that have been in car accidents have the same levels of methamphetamine in their systems as individuals that have been found in their homes with no other injury, no issue other than the methamphetamine. When we diagnose drug overdoses in forensic medicine, those should be absent any major injurious cause. And so if there's injury that has precipitated death or has caused death, then those aren't drug overdoses. Those are the injury that precipitated the death.
And what do you mean when you say that people with higher levels than what Mr. Ellis had, that but they died with meth but not from meth? What do you mean by that?
Jeff, outside the scope of his report, none of these opinions were disclosed to us.
Overruled. You may answer.
So, the literature talks about the high levels of methamphetamine and when you can see high levels of methamphetamine in the scope of people's experiences or forensic pathologists' experiences. And there are reports that compare the level of methamphetamine in individuals who died from something other than methamphetamine and the level of individuals that die from methamphetamine. And there is overlap with those numbers of individuals that have died from it, that is their cause of death, and have died with it. Because individuals that have drug addiction often will be walking around when they have just used with high levels of whatever drug that they're using, and they're not necessarily dying in that moment. And so there's nothing to really predict when they're going to die in that moment. And so that's what I mean by someone dying with and dying from.
Was there anything about what you observed and read in terms of the evidence from the scene and from the witnesses with respect to Mr. Ellis's death that would be inconsistent with a death from methamphetamine?
I'm sorry.
Jeff, this is outside anything that's been disclosed to us within his report.
All right, well, we'll excuse the jury for a minute while we have a conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, please do not discuss the case among yourselves with anyone else, and do not permit anyone to discuss the case with you or in your presence. Thank you. Okay, be seated. So what was the question again? Anything present here that suggests that methamphetamine was not the cause? Was that the essence of the question?
Yes, not consistent with the cause, or not consistent with the meth overdose. And Your Honor, I would just note, in terms of, again, I'd object to this, I would object to this speaking objections, but Dr. Mitchell's report clearly has presented that a contributing cause includes the methamphetamine toxicity.
No, he's already said that.
There was questions about that extensively during his interview. So, I mean, obviously, methamphetamine and whether or not that's the cause of his death has been and always is part of this case and part of what the defense claimed and part of what he addressed in his report.
Well, since he indicated it's a contributing cause here, the question that asks him, is there anything that was present with Mr. Ellis that suggests that meth was not the cause of death? Seems inconsistent.
It is. It's not inconsistent. It's the cause of death is not the methamphetamine. It's a contributory cause, as he just explained to the jury, that insofar as he has it on board, it could increase his need for oxygen, it can decrease his ability to recover from the hypoxia, but the meth alone is not what caused his death.
already testified here, Mr. Ellis was walking home and the intervening causes the fight. Isn't that what he said, in so many words? Yeah. You're gonna get your last dig in about that objection.
Yes, I am.
Well, anyway, yeah, but that's the, well, okay, so you're indicating that this was not disclosed to you. So many words has already been testified to, so I'm not sure.
Sure. I think not only has the court already given leeway in presenting opinions that were not previously disclosed to us, but this is, again, I think cumulative to what Dr. Mitchell's already testified to. I'll tell you, his report, the only thing that it says is it lists, about methamphetamine, is that it lists methamphetamine as a contributing cause, and that's it. It just lists methamphetamine. There's no discussion about how methamphetamine affects the heart, about how he can rule it out as a contributing cause in this case, about Brady arrhythmias or Brady rhythms being inconsistent with methamphetamine. In fact, I don't think he has the qualifications, he's not a cardiologist, and he was relying upon Dr. Dan's opinions with that regard. But, I mean, we've gone so far beyond what was presented to us in the report. That's why I'm taking issue with it. And I apologize for the speaking objection, but I don't know what other objection I could make in that regard.
Right, I wouldn't have alerted me, if you hadn't said anything, if you hadn't said it was beyond the scope of the opinion that was presented to you, I would not have known the basis. So I didn't regard it as a speaking objection as such. Anyway. You're gonna withdraw that question?
I'll withdraw that question.
Okay, where are we going next? So I can figure this out before the jury comes back.
I was just going to ask about contributing cause number 3 of the enlarged heart.
Okay.
And, I'm almost done.
Is there an issue, there's an issue about that?
And again, there's no discussion. I mean, I think part of what astounded us a bit within this report is that there's no discussion about how he can rule out these contributing causes. And so, this is the first I'm hearing about it.
Your Honor, he listed it as one of the contributing causes, and he was questioned about it during the time. This report clearly indicates that there's an enlarged heart, and
No one's gonna argue with that. The argument is, so he's got an enlarged heart, it's a contributing factor to his death, but you rule it out as the cause of his death.
Correct.
And that's where it sounds like the defense has a problem, because you didn't explain why in your report.
During the course of his interview, I mean, his report doesn't specifically lay it all out, but.
I think he says in his interview that he can't rule it all out. He has to take it as it's presented to him. He wouldn't be able to play this hypothetical game of, hey, I take the cardiac issues out, or I take the methamphetamine out. He takes it as it is.
Seems to me that's fodder for the cross-examination.
Correct. I mean, they did ask about it in the course of the interview.
Right, okay. Well, all right, we'll bring the jury back. One other thing that I wanted, I'm glad we had this break to some extent, because one of the things I failed to do was at the end of the day on Thursday, there was this issue about the 10-inch strap and so on and so forth, and I sustained the objection as to that, but I didn't go back to it this morning when we started up with the jury. I suppose I was distracted by the other issue that we talked about this morning. So, do you want me to say anything about it now when the jury comes back? Do you want me to just let it lie and not say anything about it?
No, I would like it if the court would say something about it.
Well, indicate that it was sustained and there was, it's a lack of foundation for a 10-inch distance between the feet and the hands. Okay, we'll do that when the jury gets back. So, stay ready. Mr. Osser, are you ready? Okay, when you have your back to me, I never know if that's, I understand that, but I've always heard of statement by conduct.
I didn't mean to turn my back on it.
No, but it's not much fun picking on you, Ms. Zeeks. It's always fun to pick on Mr. Osser. Let's have the jury back. I don't know if you guys heard this morning, apparently Judge Peterson died on Thursday. And those of you who knew Judge Peterson, who's been retired now, I think since '92. Those of you who knew him to be an outstanding judge and an outstanding human being. He was just a terrific person. And I ran into his son, Cliff, shortly after Father's Day this year, and I'd asked him how's his dad doing and stuff. And he said his father and his mother, who's also still alive, both 95, were doing very well. And this was like their 70th wedding anniversary, was also around that same time, something like that. And it was really nice to hear that that his faculties were all there. So I'm imagining this was a fairly sudden illness, and maybe that means there wasn't any suffering. I just hope. I haven't heard anything about cause of death, but anyway, regret losing him to this world because he was a great, great man. Welcome back, everybody. Please be seated. Before we resume, two things. One, first of all, my understanding is that the state's withdrawing that last question, so there'll be a new question. And secondly, I was remiss because last Thursday, when we dismissed you, there was an objection pending with respect to whether or not there was appropriate foundation for an estimate of 10-inch distance of the hobble strap between the feet and the hands of Mr. Ellis. And after our discussion with counsel, I sustained that objection. And so you are to disregard that testimony entirely and not to consider it all in your deliberations. With that, Ms. Eakes,
Thank you.
resume.
Dr. Mitchell, we were just talking about your contributory causes, and the third contributory cause was, I believe, a dilated or enlarged heart. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you just explain to the jury how it is, just explain to us what your conclusion is with respect to his dilated heart?
Yeah. So his heart weighed about 480 grams and was enlarged. It was described as enlarged. The weight is enlarged, and the X-ray showed that he has an enlarged heart. So all of that, for me, sustained that he had an enlarged heart, and the dilation of the heart was largely because of how the original medical examiner described the heart as dilated. Someone with an enlarged heart or dilated heart is going to have decreased cardiac output. That heart is not going to function normally. It's going to function a bit abnormally. And so in someone who is in the position that Mr. Ellis is, restrained, had undergone this violent subdual and restraint, and is in the position that he is, and with individuals on his back, his heart is going to have even harder time to respond to what's going on to him. So, as that reason, that's why it's contributory.
And why didn't you find that his enlarged heart was the proximate cause of his death?
Because there is significant injury and position and altercation and that would have precipitated or caused the enlarged heart to not be able to function as well under that stress of the altercation. That's why it's contributory.
And do you know what the cause of or the reason why Mr. Ellis had an enlarged heart?
I don't.
I could have just a moment. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Okay, cross-examination, Mr. Pertz, right there.
Doctor, good morning.
Good morning.
Doctor, when preparing for this case, you were provided, as I understand, the discovery in this case for you to be correct.
Yes.
And that consisted of the videos that you saw.
Yes.
There were witness statements that you
Yes.
and there were some police officer reports from the variety of officers that appeared at the scene.
Yes.
You received a CAD report that outlined the time frame in which the events occurred on that evening.
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And you reviewed those various pieces of material.
I did.
You saw that there was a toxicology report that listed Mr. Ellis' methamphetamine concentration at 2.4 milligrams per liter.
Yes.
That is a high amount, correct?
That is a high amount.
And you learned that he had a dilated heart.
I did.
And the person is a persistent user of methamphetamine. That can cause heart to be enlarged, right?
It's the hypertension or increased blood pressure that would cause someone's heart to be enlarged.
And were you provided with Mr. Ellis' medical records going back to, say, 2010?
Yes,
And you reviewed those materials as well?
I did.
And you received, I think, as well, information from the medical examiner's office and a medical examiner's reports.
I did.
And that listed both disease, which disclosed the cardiac history, intravenous drug usage. Do you recall that?
I don't remember the intravenous drug use history, but I remember the drug use history.
Okay. Well, so to clarify, we're talking about both intravenous and then other forms of drugs, correct?
To answer your question, I do remember him being a drug user. I don't specifically remember that he used intravenous.
Okay, very good. And then there was also a medical history that was provided that listed several different issues that Mr. Ellis suffered from over the years, correct?
Yes.
There were ADHD,
Yes.
chest pain,
Yes.
methamphetamine abuse, and physical assault that occurred in September 2019,
I believe that was in his record.
anxiety,
Yes.
asthma,
I believe that's in his record, yes.
and then a series of heart-related matters.
If you can enumerate the heart-related matters, that would be helpful.
Acute pericarditis,
Yes.
pneumonia, that's not a heart issue, but pneumonia can be the result of a heart problem.
Pneumonia is very nonspecific and can be from many different reasons, but heart disease is one of them, yes.
Okay. Peritoneal effusion without cardiac tamponade,
Yes,
hypoxia, suffered from that in the past.
I believe so. It's in his record.
Pleurisy,
Pleurisy is pain against the walls of the chest wall. So yes,
okay. And then SIRS,
serves. If it's in his record.
Okay. And the pleurisy, with respect to the chest pain, that's something that he's been suffering over the years, correct?
I don't remember exactly how long he was suffering from pleurisy.
It was not just an isolated.
Again, I don't remember exactly how long he was suffering from pleurisy in his medical history.
And then you looked at Dr. Clark's opinion in his evaluation, correct?
I did.
And Dr. Clark was the medical examiner that performed the autopsy on Mr. Ellison's case.
That is correct.
He has a significant amount of experience, does he not?
I believe he has experience, yes.
And, but there was issues that you had, I think, in some of the areas of the autopsy, lack of photographs that were taken of internal organs.
Yes,
And then also, there was a thing called flame that could have been done in various areas of the body to look for specific information.
that's correct. It's subcutaneous or underneath the skin dissection to look for deep bruising.
Okay. And Dr. Clark's opinion said that it's not the autopsy examination does not reveal the anatomic cause of death. Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
I agree with it. There's no specific injury like a gunshot wound or a stab wound that can explain the death in totality.
Okay? And then he also opined that the methamphetamine concentration is well within the fatal range and could have caused this death independently. Do you agree with that?
No,
You do not agree that that level of methamphetamine could not have killed Mr. Ellis?
in Mr. Ellis's case, no, I do not believe it killed him.
Okay. And we'll get to that, but just evidence of 2,400 nanograms, that is the toxic dose, correct?
Yes, 2.4 milligrams per liter is a toxic dose.
And if Mr. Ellis had been clean for like 3 months before that point, but then ingested enough methamphetamine to get to that level, that indeed could be fatal, correct?
Again, 2.5 milligrams per liter is within those cases that have been seen as fatal. So that's how I can answer that.
Okay. You indicated that this was considered, or you considered this an in-custody death because there was an interaction between Mr. Ellis and the police officers. And then he also had methamphetamine on him. And because of the interaction, you could not qualify this as a drug overdose. Would that be correct?
So the in-custody death is separate and apart. There's a federal definition of what in-custody means. So my definition is the federal definition. It's also the definition from the National Association of Medical Examiners. And that's once law enforcement attempts to arrest, puts their hands on an individual, that is considered in custody. So that's separate and apart. The altercation, I believe, is substantial enough to be the cause, the altercation in mechanical asphyxia is substantial enough to be the cause of Mr. Ellis's death.
Okay. And then apparently you would not agree with Dr. Clark's final statement that the argument could be made that the extremely high methamphetamine concentration should be considered the primary factor in Mr. Ellis's death.
Yes, I don't agree with that.
So you're discounting the methamphetamine basically in its entirety.
No, I'm not.
Well, you're saying it's not the cause of his death. It might be a contributing factor, correct?
Yes.
And that his enlarged heart might be a contributing factor.
Yes.
But if, can you state to the jury that absent methamphetamine and an enlarged heart, that Mr. Ellis would have died?
No, I can't say that.
Let's go to the injuries that you report here. With respect to the report, do you have your report there?
I do.
Okay, great. With respect to the reports, in the summary, you talk about videos that were shown at different points in time, in different witnesses.
Yes.
Correct. And the timeline of events that occurred that evening, correct?
Yes.
The first reference that you put down is in time 23, 21, 41.300, saying that's 113 seconds after Collins and Burbank cleared the previous traffic stop that the first Biden video showed them at the intersection, correct?
Yes.
Do you know how long the officers were present at the intersection before encountering Mr. Ellis?
I don't.
Okay. So that's something that you're not aware of being in the material that you reviewed?
That's something that I don't recall. It may have been in the materials.
You reviewed the police officers' reports, Officers Burbank, Collins, and Rankin, as part of the material you considered?
Yes.
And you reviewed what they stated caused the event to occur?
Yes.
And you're aware of that police have a job to do when they're on duty to attempt to apprehend individuals that may be a danger to themselves and perhaps to others?
Yes.
Okay. And indeed, that's what both Officers Collins and Burbank reported regarding their interaction with Mr. Ellis.
I believe that's what the report said, yes.
Okay. And then you have the McDowell video that we see, which is about 8 seconds after the Biden video, correct?
Yes.
And then you hear Officer Collins keys his microphone, correct?
Yes.
And do you have experience with officers that are involved in altercations when they key the microphone, what that might mean?
No, I don't.
Okay. There is 4 different events where Collins, you reference that Collins keys his microphone, but then also broadcasts his location at 96th and E.
Yes.
And that occurs within about 40 seconds of this interaction with Mr. Ellis.
As it states.
Okay, for the cabin.
Yes, per the CAD report.
And then Mr. Collins requested hobbles be taken. Correct?
Yeah, per the CAD report.
Per the CAD report. And then it shows a second vehicle arriving at the scene that parked behind Collins and Burbank's vehicle. Is that correct?
Yes,
And do you know who that was in the next to the vehicle?
I don't.
But it indicates that 2 officers were visible leaving the vehicle and running toward Mr. Ellis' position. Correct?
Yes.
And was it your understanding that the other 2 officers were assisting in the apprehension of Mr. Ellis at that time?
That would be my assumption, yes.
Okay, so now there's 4 police officers that are dealing with Mr. Ellis.
From what I understand, yes.
Okay. And you talk about this violent subdual. Arrests are not necessarily simple events.
No, they're not.
And they can become very, very exercised in arresting him.
I would call them violent.
Okay, so violent is the term that you're using for this type of an arrest.
That is correct.
Okay, so a lawful arrest can be violent arrest.
For sure.
Okay. All right. At 23, 24, 50, 2700 years, 2 additional cover units arrived at the scene. Is that correct?
Yes,
How many officers arrived at that point in time?
I'm not sure.
Okay, so we have at least 6 police officers present, perhaps would be 8 police officers present, arriving at the scene with Officer Collins.
I don't know.
Okay, I'm just finding what it is that you do, so that's what I want to find.
Yes.
All right. And then it shows other Sergeant Lim arriving at 23, 25, 44. Correct?
Yes.
And he requests that fire respond to the scene. That's correct?
Yes.
In fire, in then actually Sergeant Lim, 2 minutes later, requested an ambulance respond to the scene.
Per the report, yes.
Okay, and so that is, about 4 minutes after Officer Collins and Officer Burbank have an interaction with Mr. Ellis.
What's a request for ambulance or ambulance arriving?
Let me finish it. When Sergeant Lim asked for the fire to respond, that is 4 minutes after Mr. Ellis has been involved with Officers Collins and Burbank, correct?
I have, just to be clear, I have the first timeline as 23/21/41.
Correct. That's when the initial, that's when the first Biden camera shows interaction.
Right.
All right.
So that's the first interaction.
Well,
And
that's
then the
first-
request,
That's the first interaction that's documented by video. Correct.
based upon what we're talking about in the report.
Right.
So I have 23/21/41,
Correct.
and you're asking the difference between 23/27/29 when Sergeant Lim requests the ambulance.
Well, 2 minutes earlier, Sergeant Lim requested a fire response.
So from the 23/25/44 fire responds, you want to know whether or not that's 4 minutes from 23/21/41.
Yes, sir.
Yes, that's 4 minutes.
Okay, and then 2 minutes later, he requested an ambulance response.
At 23/27/29.
Okay, and so in the first 4 minutes of this encounter with Mr. Ellis, when did Officer Burbank and Officer Collins step aside from having any contact with Mr. Ellis?
I don't know if they did.
You know if they did?
I don't.
Okay, and so, and do you recall when the hobbles were placed on Mr. Ellis?
The hobbles would have been placed sometime after 23/23/41. So the request for the hobbles occurred on 23/24/32.
Correct?
And so after 23/24/32, sometime after that, the hobbles would have been replaced. From what I understand, the hobbles were placed prior to the call for fire. So it would have occurred between 24/32 and that 23/25/44.
So, within a minute.
Within those 2 minutes is when
Okay.
those hobbles, from what I understand, the hobbles would have been
All
placed.
right, and you don't know what Officer Collins and Officer Burbank were doing during that period?
I don't.
You don't know how many officers responded to that period?
From what I understand from the review of the material is that one of the officers had their knee on,
That's not my question.
I'm sorry.
The question is, how many officers responded during that 4-minute period of time?
I'm sorry, can you ask your question again? Because I thought you asked me, do I know what officers were doing during that time? And now you're asking me how many.
Right, and I want you to be specific to Officer Burbank and Officer Collins, the 2 men. What was Officer Burbank doing in that first 4 minutes? Specifically.
I don't know exactly the names of the officers and what they were doing.
Okay, and so you don't know what Officer Collins was doing then?
I don't.
Do you know how many officers ultimately responded to the scene to take care of that request?
No, I don't.
And this is kind of early on in the COVID time, correct?
This is 2020,
Yes. March 4th, March 3rd, 2020.
March 3rd, 2020. So COVID was still something that was going on, yes.
Okay, and you were aware that a spit hood was placed on these images?
I do.
And typically, a spit hood is placed on an individual because they're spitting, correct?
That's what the manufacturers say about spit hood, yes.
Okay. And you said that you had a chance to look at a picture of the spit.
Yes,
And you said that there was blood that was deposited on the spit.
yes,
And I believe you told the jury that you were concerned because there was blood on Mr. Ellis's head and face, and that's what the source of the blood was in the spit.
yes.
Well, if he was spitting in the spit, would that be the source of the blood, correct?
It could be, yes.
Okay. And with respect to, the source of the blood itself, you have an understanding of specifically what it's from?
I think those two scenarios that you just suggested are good plausible scenarios.
And how long was the spit hood on Mr. Ellis?
I don't know the exact time frame it was on.
Judge, is this good time to stop?
It would be our normal breaking time, yeah,
Okay.
so we can take a recess this time. Excuse me. So ladies and gentlemen, we'll be at recess for 15 minutes or so. Please do not discuss case among yourselves with anyone else. Do not permit anyone to discuss case with you or in your presence, and we'll see you back at the end of our break. Thank you. late tonight? Okay.
Red light.
We're gonna be done by 4 o'clock. I would think so.
I would hope so too, but I just wanted, I was hearing long periods of time, so I'm just trying to check.
All right, well, we'll see. Okay, let's have the jury. And we'll try to accommodate the doctor if we have to. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Please be seated. Continue when you're ready, Mr. Pritchett.
Yes, Doctor, I want to get back to the concept of the impact of death versus death by methamphetamine or from the enlarged heart. Hypothetically, if Mr. Ellis was walking down the street and collapsed and died, and had the same amount of methamphetamine in the system as shown here, as I understand your terminology, that would be meth-induced death. Is that correct?
Yes, if he was walking down the street and died and this level was in him and I had no other reason to believe he was dead, then yes, it would be, that's correct.
And same scenario, except no meth in the system, but he has a bad heart and he was down on the side of the road. We examined him and saw he had a bad heart, that'd be the same thing, right? Cause of death with a bad heart.
Without any injuries, without anything, yes.
Okay. And just because in this particular case, he was trying to be apprehended by law enforcement officers and then ultimately died, that's a clean custody, correct?
That is correct.
You listened to the audio tape of the video, correct?
Yes.
You heard the officer saying, put your hands behind your back, put your hands behind your back, put your hands behind your back, put your hands behind your back. Four separate occasions. Had Mr. Ellis done that and been cooperative, then he would not die, correct?
Oh, I don't know.
Well, you showed us the photographs, you showed in the photographs the indentations around the wrist and the leg from the hobble strap. And I think what you said is that because of the violent interaction between the police officers, that those were the cause of those markings, correct?
Yes.
Well, Mr. Ellis resisting would be the cause of those markings, correct?
Both and.
Well, if the officers are simply doing their job and apprehending an individual or using the tools that are available, if he is resisting that application of those utensils, that's what causes markings, correct?
My job here is not to say whether or not they're doing their job or not doing their job. I'm describing that altercation as the reason for the death. So whether or not they are doing their job and well within their ability to do their job or outside the ability to do their job, that's not what I'm here to say.
Sure, but I'm saying, I'm asking this a simple question, that the markings on Mr. Ellis's wrist and also on the leg can be caused from him resisting the apprehension, correct?
Yes.
You talked about, you did the exam and you relied upon Dr. Clark's report for certain aspects of the exam. And there was a finding in the neck area that the hyoid bone was still intact, correct?
Yes.
And could you explain to the jury what the hyoid bone is?
So the hyoid bone is a U-shaped bone. It sits underneath the jaw. If you swallow, your kind of Adam's apple raises and drops. Several of the strap muscles of the internal neck are attached to the hyoid, both above and below, and that bone acts as an anchor in your throat. It's above your voice box. And so it sits just below, on your neck, but below your chin.
In an altercation, that bone, in a choke of some nature, that bone can be fractured.
That bone can be fractured in a choke, yes.
And in Dr. Clark's report, he noted that the hyoid bone is intact.
Yes,
correct? The larynx is clear.
yes,
The thyroid gland is of the usual size and configuration.
yes,
There is no hemorrhage of the strap muscles.
yes.
So, with respect to force being applied to the neck, based on Dr. Clark's review, there wasn't force applied.
The absence of those things doesn't mean that there wasn't force applied to the neck. You can have,
There wasn't force sufficient to cause any changes in the particular.
that's correct.
Now, Doctor, your report, I'm on page 7 now.
Okay,
Actually, on page 6, we start there.
okay,
You can give a conclusion that the result of the altercation was irreversible hypoxia, respiratory arrest, and death.
yes,
And so, just so we're talking about the same thing, this encounter that Mr. Ellis had with the police officer spanned 15, 18 minutes, correct?
I didn't count the exact numbers, but if that's correct, I would agree with it.
And after the initial apprehension, they were waiting for the ambulance to arrive, the fire to arrive. It took about 11 minutes.
I believe so.
And during that period of time, Mr. Ellis was restrained, clearly, correct?
Yes,
He was hobbled, correct?
yes,
And there were several police officers that were attending to him during that period of time, watching what he's doing and moving that he was doing.
I don't know. I know that there were law enforcement there. I don't know what they were doing.
Okay. Were you aware that Mr. Ellis was placed in the recovery position during that period?
I'm aware that he was placed in the recovery position.
How long was he there?
From what I understand, it was right before, it was when he was being checked for, his pockets were being checked, and then, right before, EMS took over when he was being unhobbled.
Okay. And that was like 10 minutes after the initial apprehension, correct?
That's what I understand.
And do you know how many times he was placed in the recovery position?
I don't.
There was some force was used on Mr. Ellis that took him from the recovery position back to the prone position, correct?
From what I understand, yes.
And that was because of what Mr. Ellis was doing, correct?
If that's what the report says.
Okay. And so the officers have, he's been apprehended, he's being seen by other officers that are in the area, and he's still fighting this arrest, correct?
I don't know if he's still fighting the arrest, but
You're not aware of reading the reports about that?
I read the reports and have there's a suggestion that he's fighting.
Okay. Do you have a reason to believe that the reports were accurate?
No.
When you, with respect to methamphetamine, you're aware of how that might present with an individual?
Yes.
Would sweating profusely be an indication the person might be high on methamphetamine?
Yes.
Talking rapidly?
Yes.
And if in fact being violent, that would also be an indication of methamphetamine?
Yes.
Okay. And if officers were presented with that type of a presentation, then they should respond accordingly to prevent that person from hurting himself or hurting other individuals?
I don't.
Overruled, you may answer.
I don't know how law enforcement should respond to individuals that are acting as you suggest. I don't.
Okay, that's fine, that's it. Going into your report, you talk about the events that occurred, and you reference on page 7 at the top, after prolonged decrease in circulating oxygen, irreversible brain damage may occur.
Yes.
All right. How long is too long?
3 minutes is too long.
Okay, and you indicated that there was an LVNR that was applied to Mr. Ellis.
Yes.
Do you recall saying that the LVNR was actually done by either of the officers?
I saw the LVNR being placed
Well,
on
you saw an
video.
attempt of the LVNR.
I'm sorry, you asked me a question?
Yeah, you saw the attempt of the LVNR.
I saw the LVNR being placed and I saw Manny Ellis slump it take hold. I saw him become limp and show that the LVNR actually was successful for a brief moment in the video. I saw that, yes.
How long was the LVNR applied?
Several seconds.
How long was Mr. Ellis limp?
Several seconds.
And so that's your understanding that the LVNR was accurately or appropriately or inappropriately placed on Mr. Ellis?
I wouldn't speak to the appropriateness or inappropriateness. I would suggest that that was what I saw, deoxygenation of the brain happen, and then him regain consciousness.
You reference in the report, you say that all evidence suggests that he suffered from both decreased blood flow to the brain and decreased pulmonary function / respiratory growth.
Yes.
And you said that in addition to you were talking about his torso, being able to move his torso. You said in addition to the ability to move the torso, the most important mechanics of breathing require an unobstructed and open nose and mouth.
Yes.
And you said that any hindrance of the system can lead to decreased respiratory drying and oxygen.
Yes.
And I think you're referring to the spit mask.
Yes. I mean,
Do you know who put the spit mask on Mr. Ellis?
I don't.
And we talked about it a bit, the person spitting, that would be an appropriate use of the spit mask.
Again, I can't speak to police procedures and the appropriateness of placing spit masks.
Okay. And again, throughout your report, you talk about being violently restrained.
Yeah.
And that's the officer's attempt to apprehend Mr. Ellis.
Yes.
Right. So when you say that they're violently restraining him, that would suggest that Mr. Ellis is resisting the attempt to restrain him.
I don't know if I can say that says that he's resisting. Yeah, it's both and.
He's
Yes.
resisting their attempt to arrest him.
The reason why I'm pausing on resist is that's a connotation as if, there is, I'm having trouble with that term resist. That's why I'm pausing. But yes, there is an altercation between multiple individuals, and those multiple individuals are engaged in the same altercation.
A violent restraint would be a connotation as well.
Yes.
And with respect to the acidosis, you testified on direct that can be caused from a physical exercise of some nature.
That's right.
And this would qualify as that type of physical exercise.
Yes.
Mr. Ellis wasn't just laying.
I'm sorry?
Mr. Ellis was not just simply laying.
Not during the videos that I saw.
And you indicate in your report, this is toward the bottom of page 7, as we know, Mr. Ellis was not at rest when the spit hood was used. What do you mean he was not at rest?
Meaning he's, when I use the term at rest, is not bound and not hobbled. That's what I mean by not at rest.
Okay. And so you know he was bound at that point?
Yes.
And then his spit hood was placed on him by some officer?
Yes.
But you don't know why that was
I've been told today why it was being done.
because of spit.
That's what the premise of several of your questions have suggested that he was spit.
You also referenced that there was a lot of blood that you noted in the spit hood.
There was blood in the spit mask,
Okay.
yes.
And you said that that would not be appropriate if the person is bleeding profusely.
I'm sorry, say it again?
You said that that would not be an appropriate use of spit mask if the person is bleeding profusely.
The spit hood manufacturers say that it's not appropriate for a spit mask to be used if someone is bleeding profusely.
Did the amount of blood that you noted, would that be a profuse bleeding?
No, that wouldn't be considered profuse.
All right, so he was in a fight with police officers.
Yes, he was.
He had, what I say, external injuries of fight, and had bruising, some abrasions, and whatnot.
That's right.
None of those were fatal.
Well, that's the point, is that he was in a fight and lost. And he lost
Well,
with
he was
his life.
He was apprehended. He was ultimately arrested.
I understand that, but if we're talking about the fight, if I may, the fight is what killed him.
Well, the fight's not what killed him. He killed himself by resisting the police officers.
I'm the testifier.
Sounds argumentative.
And then, doctor, with respect to the spit hood, you said that there was evidence of aspiration of blood and fluid into his lower airway.
Yes.
And how long, if you know, was the spit hood on Mr. Ellis?
I believe minutes.
Okay. And the aspiration would be caused by that, by the spit hood being on him and then breathing in the blood.
The spit hood puts him at greater risk for aspiration, but he could have aspirated in and around with the spit hood or without the spit hood, but the spit hood puts him at greater risk for aspiration.
Which you don't know what he aspirated.
I don't know exactly the time when he aspirated.
Spit hood. And doctor, you were asked this as well on direct examination. You didn't notice any fatigue in the eyes of Mr. Ellis, correct?
That's correct.
And that is also an indication the person's being strangled or blood supplies being cut off.
That is correct.
And there was no fatigue.
There was no fatigue yet.
doctor. Thank you very much. That's all the questions.
Thank you.
Okay. Is it Mr. Usser or, okay, Mr. Usser.
Good morning, doctor. How are you?
Good morning, I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Good, thanks for asking. If I understand correctly, you're a forensic pathologist, is that right?
Yes,
And you've had a chance to review Dr. Clark's qualifications as well, right?
yes,
He's also a forensic pathologist, is that right?
yes,
Equally as qualified as you to perform post-mortem examinations, correct?
yes.
In fact, he's probably, well, I don't know if you know, if he's performed more of those than you?
I don't know.
Okay. All right, and Dr. Clark has actually examined Mr. Ellis's body, you're aware of that, right?
Yes,
Documented it with some of the photographs that you referenced during the Thursday today.
yes,
You reviewed that entirely,
yes,
all of his work related to Mr. Ellis's postmortem.
yes,
So you're aware that he being Dr. Clark, considered historical medical data related to Mr. Ellis's condition prior to March 3rd, 2020,
yes.
to include some of the medical records that he's talked to you about.
I don't know exactly how much medical record Dr. Clark saw or was privy to prior to March 3rd, March 4th. But I understand that he had visibility onto his medical record.
All right, and Mr. Percher just asked you about some very specific notations in those records.
Yes.
And it's okay. So you're aware that Dr. Clark had that information?
Yes, I am.
Did you review the same?
I did.
Okay. So you're aware of the pre-existing conditions relative to Mr. Ellis prior to March 3rd, 2020?
Yes, I am.
All right. And you know, Dr. Mitchell, that Dr. Clark completed the post-mortem examination on March 4th of 2020, right?
Yes,
And he authored a report May 19th of 2020,
yes,
and that's Exhibit 250. I think we've shown it to you maybe on Thursday. You remember looking at that?
I do.
And you're aware that the Attorney General's office relied on that report and consultation with Dr. Clark when making the charging decision here. Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware.
Well, you were aware that they had already charged these three officers prior to engaging your services, right?
I'll be honest, I don't remember when they charged the officers
All right.
in relationship to when they brought me in.
Well, they brought you in November of 2021, right?
I believe so, yes.
And they brought you in November 2021 through June of this year, right? Contractually.
Yes,
And that was extended after June of 23, is that right?
yes, I believe so.
Right. And I don't think Ms. Eats asked you this, but you're paid an hourly rate for your involvement in this case, aren't you?
Yes,
And that's at $500 an hour?
yes,
You're also paid a specific rate for depositions or interviews in this case, right?
yes, depositions, yes,
Okay. And that's $2,500 a day?
yes, whenever I have to do a deposition.
Right. And for trial testimony, your contract indicates that you'll be paid $3,500 a day plus travel expenses, right?
Yes.
How many hours do you work on this case, Doctor?
I'm looking at my report. I think I'm probably close to 40 to 50 hours on this.
Did you invoice for those 40 or 50 hours?
I've invoiced for everything up to the report,
All right. And how much did you invoice for the report?
25 hours.
Okay. And so what's that in actual dollars?
25 times 5,
That's
25 times 5, I think it's 12,000?
12,500.
Yeah, 12,500?
All right.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
I'm mad.
And that's only up to the writing of the report.
Yes,
And so you have an additional, it sounds like, at least 25 hours that you put in post-authoring the report?
That is correct,
Okay. So that was $25,000 at least?
at least.
It's much more than 25,000, isn't it?
It will be more.
It'll be in the range of 50 to 100,000?
No, I don't think it'll be nowhere near 100,000. I think after the trial will probably be closer to 35, 40,000.
All right. And you have the same expertise as Dr. Clark, right?
I mean, we're both board certified forensic pathologists, yes.
Well, let me discuss, why were you brought on to this case?
I'll sustain the objection.
Well, who contacted you?
The office, I don't know exactly the person, but the Washington office. the
Somebody from the
Washington-
Attorney General.
From the Attorney General's office, yes.
You had a discussion about being retained on this case, right?
Yes,
And were you told why you were being asked to come on this case when Dr. Clark, a forensic pathologist, had already done an autopsy and these individuals had already been charged with a crime?
yes. They told me they wanted me to review the material and give my opinion.
Even though they already had one?
Yes, apparently.
Did you ask them why they already had one?
No, sir.
Do you agree, Dr. Mitchell, that the role of the pathologist in a death investigation is one that is to objectively look at the medical findings and determine manner and cause of death, right?
That is correct.
As opposed to subjective, right? Do you know the difference?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury what the difference is and why objectivity is so important in determining manner and cause of death?
Objectivity is important in determining cause and manner of death because you want to allow for the evidence both on the body and the circumstances surrounding the death to provide you with the information that you need to establish that cause and manner. And you want to make sure that you have that information, and you're looking at as much information as possible in order to come to that opinion.
And oftentimes that opinion is relied upon by the prosecuting authority to make charging decisions, right?
Can you ask that?
You talked about the objectivity and evaluating circumstances to establish manner and cause.
Yes.
The postmortem is generally done before a charging decision is made, correct?
Most of the time, yes.
Right. So then that report that you generate in that capacity goes to the prosecuting authority, right?
Yes,
And then they make a determination, criminal or not.
that is correct.
Okay. So you know it's relied upon by the prosecuting authority to make those determinations, right?
Yes,
And so objectivity is very important when determining the manner and cause of death that's going to be reviewed later, right?
yes,
All right. Yet you describe yourself as an advocate, don't you?
I am an advocate.
Right? You publicly indicated that you're an advocate. I think you describe yourself as an advocate physician, is that right?
I am an advocate physician.
And you state so on Twitter, right? You have a Twitter profile?
All social media.
And you publicly stated that as an advocate physician, you want to use your craft to quote, the true liberation and freedom of our people, right?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well, historically in the U.S., African Americans have been enslaved and have been disenfranchised and disinherited, and so I think that it's important to use and to utilize medicine to ensure that there's health and safety of all those that we come into contact with.
And you teach that to the students at Howard, correct?
I do.
In fact, you indicated that it's important to teach the younger generation of black doctors to stand up in the face of white supremacy, right?
Yes.
And to engage in a way that leads to better health outcomes for black people.
That is correct.
And I think you stated, at least on some of your social media, that you're hoping that your legacy is such that it's not just work but action. Those are your words, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is correct.
Dr. Mitchell, there's been no indication during your review of this case that race played any part in the contact between Manny Ellis and any of the officers in the school police department.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. I think this was something in prior discussions. Motions.
Overruled. You may answer the question, Doctor.
Can you ask it again? I'm sorry.
You reviewed the entirety of the discovery and reports related to this investigation, right?
Yes.
And there's no indication either that the contact initiated between Mr. Ellis and the school police department had anything to do with this race, right?
I don't know if race had anything to do with it.
There was no suggestion, at least in the reporting, that there was, right?
I don't know if race had anything to do with it.
You have a podcast called Official Ignorance.
I do.
On that podcast, you discussed similar topics that I've been asking you about here this morning, right?
It's a death in custody podcast.
That's directed towards death in custodies related primarily to African American men who died in these custodies out there.
No, not just African American men. There's more than just African American men that are dying in custody.
Yeah, that was my question. But my question is, the discussion on the podcast is primarily related to African American men who died in custody as opposed to white or Hispanic or some other race.
No. Again, the podcast is talks about women. It talks about primarily the need for a public health approach to death in custody, identifying a checkbox on the U.S. standard death certificate so that we can know how many people are dying in the custody of law enforcement. We spend a considerable amount of time talking about Senator Ossoff's hearing on death in custody, where the women whose sons died in custody are not black men. Quite frankly, they're Hispanic and white men. So this issue of death in custody is not one that is based in race, and is not in the podcast is trying to shed light on the issue of death in custody, not on the race of death in custody.
Understood. And you've authored papers with regard, publications with regard to the same topic, is that fair?
Yes, as we started earlier when I was voir dired, one of the main papers on the investigation and examination of death in custody, I was a senior author of several forensic pathologists. And quite frankly, I'm sorry, I was one of only 2 black authors on that paper, if we're talking about race.
And one of those was published in 1999 with respect to police brutality. You authored a paper?
I did author a paper when I was a medical student in 1999.
And you authored a paper in 2017 titled "The Violent Epidemic in African American Communities." You authored that paper as well?
Yeah, that paper was largely based upon urban gun violence, particularly black on black gun violence, because I'm a violence preventionist across the board. And so I look at issues surrounding violence as a public health issue, no matter where it exists.
And did you call for an examination of the role of racism in police use of force cases?
Yes, and that particular paper, I was the second author. There were, I think, 6 other authors, and that position is the position of the National Medical Association. And so I was one of the authors and the position was adopted by the National Medical Association.
And Doctor, you've gone on national television broadcast to discuss the views that we're talking about now multiple times, is that right?
Several times, yes.
Well, you've gone on Meet the Press, is that right?
I was on Meet the Press.
You were on Morning Joe, is that right?
Morning Joe was about violence and the funding of violence from the Centers for Disease Control at NIH for funding research in violence in this country.
Gone on MSNBC to discuss these topics?
That was Morning Joe.
Okay. CBS Sunday morning?
Yes.
In fact, you published a book last month, right?
I did publish a book last month.
Death in Custody, right?
It's called Death in Custody.
and the line right under the title is How Americans Ignore the Truth and What We Can Do About It, right?
Not Americans, but America.
America.
Mhm.
And that's dedicated, I think, on the dedication page to families who have lost loved ones or died in police custody, is that right?
That's true.
Let's talk about Dr. Clark's findings for a minute. That was Exhibit 250. Mr. Purser talked a little bit about some of those findings. But you agree with his findings about the cause of death, if I understood it. Is that right?
Yeah, I essentially agree with the cause of death and manner of death for Dr. Clark.
All right. We'll talk about, let's talk about now since you're out. So manner of death determined was homicide, right?
Yes,
So homicide is the medical assessment about how an individual dies, and there are different categories you discussed, right?
yes,
That's not a comment on a criminality of such conduct. You understand what I'm asking?
yes,
Very separate terminology, right?
that is correct.
So when you say homicide, you're not saying it's criminal, are you?
I am not.
You're just saying that the death occurred in conjunction with some other person or the cause of by some other person, is that right?
Absolutely 100%.
And that cause can be justified, right?
It could be,
Excusable,
it could be.
right? You're just saying, for instance, in this case, that Mr. Ellis died in connection with the acts of another person.
That is correct.
Okay. Dr. Clark found that the manner of death, I think you talked about, well, why don't you, I'll mess it up. Tell me what your finding was.
Well, the manner of death we just spoke about, it was homicide.
Yep. And then the cause.
The cause, without in front of me, I believe it's hypoxia during physical restraint is what Dr. Clark said, but if you can present that to me, I can read it for the record proper.
I will. I don't want to suggest something that's not accurate, okay?
Neither do I.
So I'm going to show you Exhibit 250 with the permission. If I can get it out. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I actually have it in my report for your honors. I can read it from here.
Examination.
And just so we're clear, so what you're referencing is, in your report, you refer back to Dr. Clark's findings, is that right?
Yes, I do.
So, what I'm going to show you is probably duplicative of what's in your report.
Yes.
Yes.
Posted on it. I'm going to hand you Dr. Exhibit 250, and ask if you've seen that before.
Yes, I have.
And that's at least a portion of Dr. Clark's report, right?
That is correct.
And in his report, just so we're clear, his cause, I think you described it, but can you read it for us if you find it in there?
Hypoxia due to physical restraint.
All right. And that's the generally accepted medical terminology for that cause of death, correct?
The terms are acceptable medical terms for sure.
And if I understand, your only addition, at least as far as in response to Ms. Eaps, was that you added due to violent subdual as the cause.
No, it is style, right? So I said mechanical asphyxia versus hypoxia.
Okay.
So that is the difference. And then I called the physical restraint violent subdual and restraint.
Okay, is that an objective medical term?
Violent subdual.
Okay, that's, I guess, generally accepted in the medical examiner community as a descriptive causation.
Yeah, I've used violent subdual on many of my cause lines.
Right. And then the other significant causes, I think Mr. Purcher talked about, you agree that those were Dr. Clark's other significant causes, right?
Yes,
And you agree that those, in your findings, were also other significant causes.
yes,
Mr. Purcher asked you about a timeline, and actually contained in Dr. Clark's report lists the specific times that things were done. Is that where you derived your timeline from, or did you get that from the officer's reports separately?
from the office, the CAD report separately.
Okay. So then you're aware then that at least Dr. Clark had similar findings of the timeline, at least in his report, wherein hobbles were requested at 24 hours. Do you recall that in Dr. Clark's report?
I don't specifically recall it, but
Consistent with your.
consistent. And for the record, I'm looking at my report,
Let me get the number, Doctor.
Exhibit 479. And here in my report, hobbles are requested at 23:24:32.
All right. And the request for fire by Sergeant Lim was at 23:25 hours, is that right?
Yes, that is correct, 23:25.
So a minute and 12 seconds after the request for hobbles, is that fair?
That's fair.
And do you know how long it took to get the hobbles from wherever they were located?
I do not know.
Do you know how long it took to apply the hobbles once they were located?
I do not.
But you understand that they were applied at the time Sergeant Lim requested fire, right?
That is correct.
So at sometime in that 1 minute and 12 seconds, somebody retrieved the hobbles and they were applied to Mr. Ellis, and then then Sergeant Lim requested fire. Is that the timeline, right?
Yes.
So it could have been immediately upon application of the hobble.
The request for fire and EMS,
Yes.
it's a short distance between when the hobble and the request comes.
And then medical did not arrive until 23:34 hours, is that right?
I have Tacoma Fire arrives on scene at 23:33.
So 8 minutes after the request from Sergeant Lim for fire.
That's what it, from 23:25, yes, 8 minutes.
And so you know in reviewing the reports that during that 8 minutes, Mr. Ellis is still breathing according to all the officers, is that right?
Yes,
That they make specific observations about watching his chest rise and fall and him speaking with them, right?
I don't remember in review that he's speaking with them, but I do remember them suggesting that he's breathing.
And he's still breathing when the medical gets there, isn't he?
From what I've read, his breathing is becoming slower when medical arrives.
Well, medical doesn't start CPR for a couple of minutes, do they?
I don't know exactly when medical starts CPR as soon as they arrive. Here, I have CPR in progress, but I don't know exactly the time based upon when they arrived and when they started CPR.
Understood. Do you have any information that indicates where Officer Burbank and Collins are once hobbles are applied?
From what I understand, an officer is still applying pressure to his back when hobbles are in place.
Okay, so what you're saying, what I heard you say, first I got it wrong. Once hobbles are applied, someone's still applying pressure.
That's correct.
You know who that is?
I would have to look at all the record. I don't record the who. That's part of that objectivity.
Understood. Get it. Were you aware that Officer Collins was relieved and was not in contact with Mr. Ellis as soon as the hobbles were applied?
No, I'm not.
Are you aware that Officer Collins and Officer Burbank were in fact removed from the location of Mr. Ellis's body once the hobbles were applied?
No, I'm not.
Are you aware that Officer Collins and Officer Burbank were giving an account of what happened immediately after the hobbles were applied?
No.
Are you aware that Officer Collins and Officer Burbank were discussing with Sergeant Lim what led up to the interaction immediately after hobbles were applied?
No.
Do you know if they were even within 20 feet of Mr. Ellis's body?
No, I don't.
The application of the spit hood. Dr. Clark in his report says that's probably the most important factor in the cause of death, doesn't he?
He does.
Do you agree with that?
It's not the most important. No, I disagree. Yes, I disagree with it.
All right, we'll talk about that in a second. But Dr. Clark believes that was the most significant cause of failure of receiving air as it related to Mr. Ellis due to hypoxia, correct?
That's his initial report. He issues an addendum that qualifies other issues because he became aware of new information.
Of course.
But I've seen both reports.
Correct. And you agree that he found the spit sock to be, or spit foot to be the primary factor? You disagree with that, is that right?
From his first report.
Okay. Are you aware that Officer Farinas applied spit foot in this case?
Again, I don't know the officers who apply the pressure, hobbled, spit hood. I don't know who the individuals are.
Does Officer Farinas, have you heard that officer's name before?
I don't recall.
Are you aware that Officers Collins and Burbank were not on scene next to Mr. Ellis when the spit foot was applied?
I'm not aware.
In Dr. Clark's report, he indicates on page 2 that the autopsy does not reveal an anatomic cause of death. I think Mr. Pritchard asked a little bit about that, but I want to follow up on that. Oftentimes, well, tell us what an anatomic cause of death is, please.
So, anatomic cause of death is we call it, some people call it a level 1 type of cause of death. Gunshot wounds, multiple blunt force trauma where there's a skull fracture and you can see the injury. Something that grossly at autopsy you can see a gunshot wound. You can see that caused that. A ruptured heart. Those types of things would be considered anatomical causes of death. And oftentimes we don't have a specific anatomical cause of death.
No, you say oftentimes, that's not unusual, do you agree?
It's not unusual.
Are you familiar with the term excited delirium?
I am.
We're going to talk about that in a minute, okay? But in instances where medical examiners have found a lack of anatomy of death, they've attributed that to excited delirium in the past, is that right?
Yeah, medical examiners have used the term excited delirium to define death,
Where there's a lack of anatomy of death, right? Awesome.
particularly in the presence of law enforcement.
Well, we're going to talk about it in a second. So that is consistent with a lack of anatomy of cause of death that was found by both you and Dr. Clark in this case, right?
I'm sorry, can you ask the question again?
Both you and Dr. Clark found a lack of anatomy of the cause of death as it relates to Mr. Ellis.
There is no definitive anatomic cause of death in Manny Ellis.
Okay, we'll take our noon recess, ladies and gentlemen. Please be back by 1:15. Please do not discuss the case among yourselves with anyone else, and do not permit anyone to discuss the case with you or in your presence. Enjoy your lunch.